Lee, thank you for joining me, buddy. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Let's Talk Bro. When I started this, I wanted to speak to you about what we're about to talk about today. So yeah, thanks for taking the time out.
Thanks for inviting me on.
Awesome. So let's go straight into it. I think what appeals to me about you and the things that you talk about online is that you're a pharmacist, which we'll talk about in a moment and how that journey came about. But you're looking at health from a different lens. And I think it's really important for a lot of people to understand that health is not necessarily what we are maybe led to believe it is. And there are so many other kind of layers, like an onion, to actually what good health is. So first of all, why did you decide to go into pharmacy and become a pharmacist? And then the second part to that, which I can maybe allude to later, is you're a healthy guy. You can clearly see it just from the way that you look. You're a fit guy as well. So why that part of health? How did that come into your life? So maybe let's start with the pharmacy piece first. What made you decide to go into pharmacy?
It's probably not going to be the answer that you'd expect, but it was literally the flip of a coin between pharmacy and chemical engineering. And the reason being is, so I come from a family of business owners, mainly within concrete manufacturing, landscape and building, and they just didn't think that was the way forward for me. And I had a bit about me in school, done quite well, and then they just sort of pushed me down the university route, which I have sort of different opinions on now, whether I'd give that advice to my kids. But yeah, so went into pharmacy, and then I took it from there, went into hospital pharmacy where you can have more of an impact. And then I think it was going back to why I went down this route of health was I got diagnosed with a genetic form of diabetes in 2005. So I was just about 10. Not much was known about the condition. And at the time, they sort of scaremongered me into long-term insulin therapy. And at the time, I was needle phobic. I went for continuous blood tests it must have been every morning for 3 to 4 weeks because they couldn't understand what it was. So I just used that as a springboard from an early age. When I come to 18, cut out all sugary drinks, fast food. I was into the gym anyway. I used to play footy and then found a love for weight training, which was something that was different to everyone else in my family. And then I just used it from that point, really.
So you're 18. How did you know, or where did you kind of get so how did you know to cut out certain foods, and what resources did you use? Who did you have guidance from? A healthcare professional? Did you kind of just take it upon yourself? And how did that come about?
So at the time, I started the gym when I was just about to turn 17, and there was a couple of people on YouTube who were just literally showing you how to do certain exercises. One of the things that kept on coming up was diet, and it was very basic in terms of don't eat too much fat, don't do certain things. Obviously, fast food's not that good for you. And I just sort of took the mantra of, if I can do anything that's going to harm my health, I want to take that away from me. So I had no guidance from family members. My family, if they ever watch this, they're sort of not immune to the fact that I do call them out, but they were never really into health and fitness. And there was no one above me. So I just literally went off a few old YouTube videos and then just went down the aesthetic route in the gym. And it just they just went hand in hand. And I think a lot of people jumped on that bandwagon. And it's only over the last, I'd say 3 to 4 years that the science has evolved to the point where you don't go to the gym just to look good. There's greater benefits.
Yeah, I want to get into that. And I think, this podcast is aimed at the male population, and I think a lot of men, and this happens to the female population as well, but a lot of men who go into the gym at a very early. I mean, I started the gymming in my teens as well, and it was purely because I wanted to look a certain way. And I think that's still very true now. You go onto Instagram and you just see the number of fitness influencers who are on there and the way that they look. You go on YouTube, as you mentioned, there is a certain aesthetic that, young men and even older men now, like I'm in my 40s, and I now, obviously the algorithms know I'm in my 40s, and they push all these ads to me saying over 40, you want to get shredded, and it's all these workouts for people that are over 40, and that's all great. Look, I've been guilty of this. We were just talking off air. I still go to the gym because yes, I want to be healthy and I understand longevity and all of those other things, but I also still want to look good naked, right? We all do. I think it's a normal part of being a human being. Of course, in the female world, it's very much the same. So young men are kind of influenced, if you like, to go into the gym to look a certain way. But one thing I've discovered as you get older is it's not just about what you look like in the mirror, and there's so much more to that. So let's unpack that. At what point did you start to think about what does fitness and health mean beyond just what I look like?
I think it was, so with the diabetes, I was going on an annual basis to get bloods checked and etc. And then becoming more and more involved with the clinics. This was before I went into pharmacy. You could see the health of someone who was in the clinic waiting for an appointment before me. So then I was thinking, is there any way that I can optimize it? And then obviously once you qualify and you see not necessarily a set amount of people that come in, you see like younger people who are not necessarily unhealthy on the external side of things, who are being sort of succumb to ill health. And that's when I sort of look down a different route. What is it that I can optimize, and what else is happening within the body as opposed to how we just look? And like you said, I think the biggest reason I went into the gym in the first place is how you look. I mean, human beings do it inherently. Why do we go after nice cars, Rolls Royces, Bentleys when they all get us from A to B? It's just the way we are, isn't it? But I think it was just, I drew a conclusion that these people who don't look unhealthy are having ill health at a younger age, and there must be a way to combat it, or there's definitely something happening beneath the surface.
Yeah, I think it's that's a good way to think of it. Okay, so yeah, diabetes is something that's close to my heart as well. As you know, I've worked with the diabetes prevention service here in the UK, and helping people to understand what is it that we can do to prevent conditions like diabetes. Of course, your condition is a unique one because it was some sort of genetic condition that you developed or had. What I wanted to talk about was really, looking a certain way and looking what we think is healthy doesn't necessarily mean you're going to live longer and you're going to have a healthy kind of disease-free life. And I think that really struck home to me when, and I can't remember, I'm trying to think of the footballer's name, but I can't think of who it is now. But the first time I heard a footballer having a heart attack on a football pitch, right, that was a key wake up. Now there could again be genetic conditions there as well, but you see it more and more now where someone looks healthy and they're having issues with heart health, they're having issues with other things as well. So yes, diet is one thing. I don't want to get into the diet wars today. That's a whole series of podcast episodes, but we can definitely talk about it. Movement is definitely a key thing, but one of the things that I think people are not so much aware of, and it's becoming more common knowledge now, are things like stress in our health and our longevity. If we want to use that, again, a buzzword at the moment, isn't it? Looking at longevity, but so let's touch on that. So from why is stress? Because I know people who go to the gym, they look great. I used to work in the city. So these are, city people work. They've got high paying jobs, highly, highly stressful jobs, but they look amazing, right? They've got personal trainers. They train multiple times a week. Yes, they drink alcohol. Yes, they may do other things, but they look great, but they have high levels of stress. And you often hear a lot of these people having issues with their health later on. So what is it about stress, even if you've got a good diet and a good exercise plan, that causes havoc with our health?
I think I mean, I was probably victim of this earlier on, is that you just think stress is a psychological impact, and it's not. It's physiological in terms of the hormone cortisol. That's a big buzzword at the moment. A lot of women's health is being directed around cortisol, but what that does to your body in terms of releasing energy stores, increasing heart rate, inflammatory responses, it's just this chronic, unnoticed side effect, really, of something that can be managed by simple things. I mean, I'm probably the worst person to give advice on managing stress. Externally, probably come off as stress free, but stupid things like I don't get enough sleep. You should be 8 hours a day. A lot of people who are in high positions or want to do a lot, like yourself, for example, you work, you've got a family, you want to cram in podcasts and do all these things. For you to then prioritize sleep, it becomes on a back burner, and that just sets you up on the wrong thing for the rest of the day. But I think it's just the fact that we don't correlate stress to a physiological response and just treat it as psychological, and oh, we'll get by. I think that's the biggest downfall to stress.
Okay, so what you're actually saying is that when we are experiencing stress, it's not just on our mind, right? There's a physiological chemical reaction happening internally, which can drive various health factors or health markers up. So, for example, one thing I learned whilst working in the diabetes space is that, stress alone, just having, stress alone and high levels of it can lead to type 2 diabetes. Can we unpick the mechanism behind that a little bit?
Oh yeah, I mean stress, cortisol. I mean, a lot of people think diabetes is a disease of overconsumption of sugar, when in reality it's an overconsumption consumption, can't speak today, of fat within the liver and pancreas. So whatever leads to an accumulation of fat within them organs is going to then predispose you to type 2 diabetes. So cortisol, for example, which is released in high levels of stress, it's a weird hormone in terms of, even though you might have a lot of sugar and you've got access to that within the body, it forces your liver to make more sugar through a process called gluconeogenesis. So then by adding that to the bloodstream, if you're not utilizing sugar, whether it's due to insulin resistance or that you've got an energy abundance, you then are more predisposed to store it as fat. If it's stored as fat in the liver, it gets projected into the pancreas. And type 2 diabetes, as you're probably aware, is one of them is lack of insulin production. The other one is lack of insulin sensitivity. And if there's too much fat in the pancreas, then the cells that release insulin, which are the beta cells, they sort of become confused. They de-differentiate and they don't serve the same purpose they would do in a normal non-diabetic patient. But I mean, I looked into cortisol about 6 months ago, and it is just a mind-baffling hormone. It affects everything. So that's what it is with that. And then low-grade inflammation. Again, anything that predisposes you to an inflammatory condition will, again, trigger the diabetic sort of response, if anything.
Yeah. Okay. So that's fascinating. So what you're saying is that when we have high levels of cortisol, i.e., a period of time where we're potentially stressed or we have high levels of stress, what the body is doing is trying to create more glucose because it thinks that we need it, right? So from my understanding, this goes back to, if we look at evolutionary biology and you think, back in the day, when we were, 10, 20,000 years ago, stress was not as chronic as it is now, right? It came in acute kind of, it came and kind of went. So, for example, we didn't have any food, or for example, we were under threat of an attack from an animal, right? In that moment, your body is mobilizing glucose because it thinks that you need it to serve a purpose. So if we take the animal example, right, you're walking along and suddenly there's an animal who's threatening to attack you. Your body, you get that fight or flight response, right? So cortisol is released, your cortisol levels go up, your stress levels go up. The body mobilizes glucose from within your body. Your glucose levels go up. But the difference here is that you are then most likely going to use those glucose levels based on your response. So you got a choice here. Are you going to fight the bear or are you going to run away from the bear, right? Now, whichever one you choose, you need glucose, you need energy, right? So if you're going to fight the bear, you need extra energy to help you to fight the bear, which is a dumb idea. Or you're going to run away from the bear and you need that extra energy to help you, run further, run further or run faster. And then hopefully the stress levels will go down. Maybe you choose the right option, you run away from the bear, you hide and the bear goes away, and then everything kind of returns back to baseline. Now in the modern day, that mechanism is still present, but we're not faced with a physical challenge, right? We don't necessarily, not all, sometimes, but not always is it a physical situation, right? So it could be, I don't know, your car's not starting in the morning, little microdoses of stress. It could be the trains are late. I went into London today and there was a cancellation of a train. You're late for a meeting. It could be your boss is having a go at you. It could be, the kids are doing your head in, right? Whatever it might be, there's this cortisol level, the spikes, the same process happening. Then that glucose that we create, the excess, is not going anywhere. And then what you're saying is that's then converted into fat via the liver. Is that my very basic understanding of it? Is that does that make sense?
Yeah, that's one of the mechanisms. And like you said then, I mean, there's a few things. If you've ever seen anyone take a steroid called prednisolone for whether it be an asthma attack or COPD infection, long-term steroids can lead to steroid-induced diabetes.
Wow, okay.
And going back to the gene thing that you said before, I read something in a study, again, I don't know how relevant this is, but apparently our genes have not evolved that much from 40,000 years ago. And obviously modern day living just evaluated and evolved at such a rate that we are in energy abundance. We are stimulated by chronic stress each day. And stress, like I obviously have just given a negative impact, but without stress, we wouldn't be able to survive. We have patients who have no stress response where they would die. It's called an Addisonian crisis. So in patients who don't have the right amount of cortisol, let's say they're going for surgery, we have to give them extra steroids, otherwise they wouldn't be able to respond to stress and they would die. And we have it every morning. We have a cortisol boost because we've gone from lying down, being relaxed, to then requiring to mobilize energy stores when we wake up. So that's why you normally do a cortisol test in the morning. So it has benefits, but like you said, it needs to be on and off like it was years ago where it was an animal coming for you, for example. Whereas now if we're late on the train or we've got social media saying that there's a war on or something else, we're constantly stimulated by negative things that can lead to chronic stress, which is where the issues lie with a lot of health.
Yeah, so we're just in this constant state of stress, and we don't even know it, right? And this is the thing. I mean, I remember we used to speak to patients who you'd sit down and do their assessments. You'd take their usual measurements, whether it's right or wrong, height, weight, BMI, all of that stuff, and then you suddenly, again, you're labeling them. You're obese or you're overweight, or in some cases you're normal. And even with the people that were, normal BMI. They didn't have their waist circumference was normal. They would tell me that they exercised regularly. They would tell me that they eat a relatively good diet, and you'd ask them, for a self-reported food journal, and on the surface it seems like it was relatively okay, but yet their glucose, their HbA1c, which is the test that you take to measure your glucose levels to determine whether you have diabetes, would still be raised. And then you turn the question to stress, as we've just discussed, and you can just see it in their faces. And you kind of walk through what their day looks like, and sleep, which I definitely want to talk about in a moment, is another factor. You ask them about those things, and suddenly you get this picture of why they're sitting in front of me in the first place.
Yeah, I think whether it's a bit off topic, but with not so much healthcare. There are some people in healthcare who do the same thing, but definitely social media. We look at health as using one or two metrics, when in reality, you've got to look at everything. So I was saying before to someone where if having a certain thing in your diet meant that you didn't go out and exercise because you had to prepare that food for a small increase, then what's going to be more beneficial for you? And you can't isolate metrics in their own right. You need to treat everything as holistic, which is definitely, I think that's the scary thing about social media for me, is that people can go on and blindly say with confidence, even though there's no evidence of something being detrimental to you or being beneficial without weighing up anything else, which is why I sort of stay away from that, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I do, and I'm sure someone's doing studies on this on the levels of stress that we've had in our lives since the advent of social media. I think there's a lot of benefits to social media. I mean, look, we met via social media, so
Of course.
there's obviously connections that people can make. I've met many connections via this podcast and other podcasts that I've done through social media, but there's obviously the other side of it, which you kind of just highlighted there, in that there's that extreme opinion on each side. You look at anything you want to do, whether you want to follow a specific diet, you can find evidence, and I use the term evidence very loosely there, not necessarily scientific evidence, but evidence of others who will support your view, and therefore validate some behaviors that may not necessarily be good for you long term. But like I said, the whole diet wars is a whole different conversation. So we're living in this state of constant stress. We're living in this realm of, social media, information overload. There's a lot of things we can do about it. There's a lot of things that, are widely talked about to do about. So we'll talk about actually some of the solutions a little bit later. I want to tie this back to you in terms of what you're doing, because as a pharmacist, you mentioned there about looking at holistic health. And I know from my own personal experience, not with me, but with my family. So for example, my father's diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic. He's got a heart disease and various other conditions as well. I remember years and years ago when he would go to the doctor, and I remember when he was diagnosed with diabetes, when the doctors would speak to patients. And by the way, I'm not knocking the profession of a doctor. I think they're very honorable and they do an amazing job. And it's just, I think there's a shift in the way that they need to be trained, or the way they are trained. I'm sure that's happening now. But they would never ask those questions, right? What is your diet like? How much exercise do you actually do? How much sleep do you get? What's your experience as a pharmacist in the world today of that? Has that shifted? Is it shifting? Is there still a lot of work that needs to be done?
There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think from our course, I think we ended up doing 1 to 2 hours of lifestyle at a push each year, and that was a 4-year degree. I think medicine's in a similar realm. But in terms of, I always speak about this with other people who are not medical, and they think, why do all these professionals give pills out? So I always use, whether we come on to him later on. So my dad, he was one of the reasons why I went down this company, which we'll probably bring up later on. But he had a heart attack when he was 50, had the second one when he was 51. By the time these people come in, because there's been so much damage done, I think a lot of doctors or professionals are more inclined to treat them from a medical legal point of view. So we haven't got much time left. Whereas, so I'm 31. If I go to a GP, I've just done a blood test for my brother who's 26. And I said to him, okay, well, what is it that's in your diet? What are you doing with your lifestyle? We've got a lot of time to act on a lot of things because we've got so much time ahead of us. If it doesn't go right, we can add in medication. But I think that's why doctors do go down that route. A lot of professionals are scared of the amount of time they've got from their first point of call and contact until something may happen. So I think that's one of the things. But I think because they're not trained to go through lifestyle, obviously lifestyle medicine, diet has evolved drastically over the last 2 years. I just don't feel as though they're confident enough to advise on the subject. I think that's the biggest thing. It's a confidence issue.
Yeah, so they're going back to default in what they know, and they've been trained to diagnose a symptom of a condition. So the symptom would be raised glucose levels or raised cholesterol levels or whatever that marker may be, and it's how do we treat that symptom and bring that number down or bring that marker down, as opposed to looking at what actually caused this in the first place, and can we treat that? And I think that's where programs like the diabetes prevention program, it's an excellent program because it does look at the root cause of something like raised glucose levels, and it does go to look at treating some of the root causes. And some people, may go on to take medication, but a lot of people do see positive results with their, when they get their HbA1c retested and see that number coming down, and that's quite a welcome, a welcome shift in the way that the medical world is shifting. So it's interesting to hear your perspective of that as a pharmacist. So, how did all of this motivate you to do what you're doing now? So let's talk about that. So yeah, what are you doing now? I want to talk about Bialyte, which is the company that you have started with Jess, your partner. How did you get to that point, and what was the motivation behind that? And tell us about Bialyte itself.
Yeah, so Bialyte's an at-home blood testing service where finger prick. So you just basically go on the website and you select which test it is. We've specialised within heart health because obviously something close to my heart, pardon the pun, is that obviously a lot of family members on my dad's side basically have either died or had a heart attack by the age of, on average, 50. And so we've always looked into preventative health. We've been on this course for, I'd say, about 3 years. We started a podcast in 2024, and that's how we eventually went on to meet yourself and Anisha, which was nice because you put a lot of time aside for us. But that's where the company stemmed from. And in our normal day-to-day practice, there's a lot of things that we can't do. So like I said before, when you're meeting a patient, I do obviously put a lot of emphasis on the healthcare system in terms of doctors, pharmacists, whoever are interacting with patients tend to go for medication first because of either lack of education or scared of the medical legal system and if something happens in a bad way. But also I feel as though a lot of patients have a lot to take for accountability because if a lot of people in the 40s were like yourself and Anisha who are actively going to the gym, looking after the diet and doing all these other things, then the way that we treat the population would change. It would go more to prevention. So we thought there must be a way we can intervene with younger people. And one of the things that kept on coming up was I was requesting blood tests for patients in their late 20s, for example, a lot of men, to be honest, where I'd seen the HbA1c was creeping up, wasn't diabetic, probably late 30s. And for context, 42 and above is classed as pre-diabetes, 48 and above is diabetes, for anyone who doesn't know. And I just wanted to get them tested and intervene at that point. And I was getting a lot of blood tests rejected because of NHS funds. So I thought, okay, there's got to be something we can do here. And at the same time, we were looking at a lot of Canadian and American physicians, cardiologists really, who were pioneering these new biomarkers and blood tests, which are far greater than what we've got in the UK for predicting heart health. And with all of our family history, we thought, well, is there any way we could give someone of my age sort of a foresight, like insight into the future, basically, can they act now? If I would have given my dad the intervention that he had at my age, for example, with all the information, could he have prevented a heart attack? Probably. So that's where all the motivation come from. And it was hard. It took us 8 months to go through insurances. That was quite hard. No one wanted to insure 2 pharmacists doing it. But that's the motive. We don't want to sell any supplements on the back of it. It's merely informational purposes only. So just so someone can know where they stand. If they carry on going on the trajectory that they're going on, are they going to have a stroke, a heart attack, form into diabetes, or some form of medical complications down the route? Or is there something that they can act upon now to better their lives? And I don't know whether we come onto it, but longevity, we said before, is a buzzword. Everyone thinks of longevity as live until as old as you can. But if I said to you now, if you had the option to live until you were 80, but have a really good quality of life, you could still move, hike, go to the gym, play sports, play with your family members until you were about 79, and then you had a really bad year in your last year. Or you could live until you were 90, but the previous 15 years you were bedridden. I think you'd probably go for the former. And I think that's the biggest difference with longevity and health span. It's about quality of life. And that's what we're trying to encourage through early testing.
Yeah, 100%. I'll take the 80 all day long, and I think that for me is a personal goal. I'm I've got young children, and I remember my upbringing, and I want to make sure that when my kids are of an age where they want to do active things and play sports and whatever it might be, I want to be able to do those things, right? I don't want to be struggling, and so I want to have an active older life. And that's when I think of longevity, that's what I think of. I don't, right now I'd have no inclination of wanting to live to 120, which I know a lot of people are, trying to get themselves to do. It's the quality of that, of those years that matters. So back to Bialyte then. So you have this home blood testing kit. What is it? So you mentioned heart health is something that you're specifically focused on. What are you looking for? What are you testing for? And just give us a breakdown of what that looks like.
Yeah, so we do heart health, and it encompasses basic metabolic health. So it's got CRP, which is an inflammatory marker. And the difference with our results are sort of off topic is that the NHS will treat you to normal levels. It doesn't try and optimize anything, whether that's a bad thing on the NHS or, again, that's for someone else to have an opinion. But we also go off populations, which was something that was new to me until I started setting up this. So if I get your liver checked in Liverpool, for example, obviously a lot of people tend to drink in Liverpool. So we let the upper limit of normal go a bit higher. So let's say we let the upper limit go to 47. Now, let's say we go to somewhere really nice, Cotswolds, goes up to 32. So you're only assessed against the population that you're within. So we can let your liver take literally a bit more of a kick in Liverpool as opposed to down south, which that was sort of new to me. So I sort of wanted to change that and treat to standardized levels. So we've got CRP, but we assess that right down to the lowest range that we can pick it up. So we can assess low grade inflammation. We do HbA1c, which is a diabetic marker, which you said before, which assesses your blood sugar over the last 3 to 6 months on average. We do a genetic cholesterol profile, which you'll get at the GP, which is your LDL cholesterol, HDL, non-HDL, inherently all good and bad cholesterol, even though it's the same thing. And then we've introduced these new biomarkers, which we don't have access to in the NHS. So one of them is called ApoB, which is how would you put it? It's a more advanced insight than LDL cholesterol. So it basically tells you all the amount of particles that carry cholesterol away from your liver to your arteries. So it gives you an actual number. And then we also do one called LPA. So when you've mentioned before footballers or sports people who have strokes or heart attacks in their 20s or 30s, they've probably got high levels of this LPA, which is a genetic variant of LDL that you make from the age of 2. So when I done my test, I was hoping mine wasn't going to come back high, but mine come back so that only, I think it's 0.7% of the population in the world have a higher value than me, which makes sense in terms of my family history, but it's one of them things that's bittersweet knowing it.
Okay, so that's interesting. I didn't know about that last that last one you mentioned there. So just touching on that, if someone does have that genetic, sorry, what was it called again? I've just lost the train of thought.
LP little a, it's called.
LP little a, yeah. So if someone does have that, what is there anything you could do with it? Is there any kind of way to prevent the trigger from triggering in the future?
I mean, the best way for this is if you've got high levels of that, like I have, for example, it's about offsetting all your other risk factors because it's a genetic marker. There's not much you can do with diet that directly impacts that level. But what you can do is offset HbA1c, ApoB, all these other cholesterol markers that would have increased your risk. Now, there are some medications out there on the NHS at the moment. You would have to go privately for it. They've got a 30% chance of lowering it. But there's ones over the next 2 years that have got 95% effectiveness against it.
Okay. So,
yeah,
so the market for that is evolving. It is evolving slowly. So what it sounds like you're saying is you just look at all the other traditional lifestyle factors and you just kind of make sure that you're doing your best to manage those to bring all the other markers down in a hope of kind of keeping that one dormant. But there's I mean, if it's genetic, there's not much you can do, right? Is that fair?
No. So I mean, I'd advise anyone to get a tested at least once in a lifetime because your levels from the age of 5 basically don't change. We fully express at 2, and your levels from 5 don't really change unless you were to have these types of therapies that are coming out.
Right. So the footballer example is a good one because these guys are highly trained athletes. They're physical specimens. They're training every single day, cardio, conditioning, strength training, flexibility. They're doing all of their diets are all taken care of. Now they're also I think a lot of the big football clubs have sleep experts as well, where they're making sure they optimize their sleep. So they're doing all of the things that you would expect someone to do to live a healthy lifestyle. Yet a small percentage, it is a very small percentage, are suffering from heart conditions. And this is this is what you're saying. This is most likely, we can't say that across the board, most likely down to this.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. And I think one thing that a lot of people don't seem to grasp as well with health conditions is that each individual person has their own threshold. So, for example, diabetes, I'm seeing more and more patients now getting type 2 diabetes who are underweight, which is the complete paradox to how we would diagnose diabetes. And you might have someone who's got, I don't know, a normal blood pressure for me might be too low for you, but that's my personal threshold. And that's the same thing with a lot of things in health and wellness, is that you can't assess. We assess everyone on a population, which is ironic to get treatments across, and we do studies, but all them metrics are basically useless unless it's individualized to yourself.
Got it. Yeah. So everyone's different. I mean, yeah, we have to acknowledge that, and we all going to have different ways that we respond to different things, and I think that's what's important. And I think maybe that highlights the importance of getting your biomarkers and your blood tested in this way, so that you do have a little bit of understanding. You said something earlier which I kind of found a bit shocking. Actually, was you mentioned in Liverpool you might. So you're saying that was this at NHS? If you get tested on the NHS, you are benchmarked against where you are in the country. So if you're, for example, getting a test in an area where there are high levels of drinking consumption or alcohol or whatever it might be, or if there's high levels of obesity or people that are overweight, you're benchmarked against that population rather than the entire country as a whole. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's not with every test. So HbA1c, blood pressure, we standardize, but a lot of things like liver function's a big one. And the only reason I noticed it is that I work in GP surgeries in Manchester, and I've got one in Cheshire, and I noticed the upper level. So the reason why it's important to us is a lot of medications metabolize from your liver, and we have a cutoff where if that liver function goes 3 times greater, we then have to stop that treatment. So let's say the liver marker is 50 in Manchester and it was 40 in Cheshire. So basically, if it can go up to 150 in Manchester, but in Cheshire it's only 120. So we're letting someone's liver take more of a beating because of where they are geographically, which obviously makes no sense because the liver doesn't know where they are in the world.
Right, yeah, exactly. But that's where my thought was going as well. I was like, that doesn't sound like a smart move, but hey, it is what it is. Okay, so someone does this heart health test. They get their HbA1c, their cholesterol, APOB, and all of these things tested. Do you then give them recommendations of what to do next, or this is just a service where they get the blood tests, they get the results, and that's it? What happens afterwards?
So we have a consultation with everyone. So it's either me or Jess. We haven't actually got to the point where you can pick, but we all obviously give out the same advice. And it's literally, if your ApoB comes back high, let's say, for example, that could be due to high amounts of refined carbohydrates, could be a lot of saturated fat. It also could be the fact that you're not training in a zone 2 range for enough per week. So it would be merely optimizing your lifestyle through what we can ascertain through the consultation. There's no supplements to be sold. It's just, like I said, informational purposes, try and improve it. There's no requirement to retest. It would only be on what you feel fit to do some.
Fine. Okay. So there is a guidance. It's not just like, here's your results, off you go. ChatGPT. ChatGPT will tell you what to do. Yeah. It's like, hey, this is what we recommend based on you as an individual and what you've told us about your particular lifestyle. So you mentioned there, hey, this person's doing a ton of strength training, but they're not doing a lot of zone 2 cardio. So maybe then we need to introduce some of that and make recommendations for that.
Yeah, it's just intervening as early as we can. Like, we've obviously got a lot of treatments that can come in later down the line, but that's the ironic thing that a lot of people don't maybe get with us is, yeah, we are pharmacists, we can prescribe, but I don't get funded by pharmaceutical companies, which is a big one I hear all the time.
Right.
I wish I did. But my approach is no medication first, use it as a fail safe. And I think that's what all healthcare should be. We've got the ability to do so. And a lot of modern day diseases come from the lifestyle we lead. And we want to combat that in the best way possible.
All right. So look, let's start talking about what to do, prevention. Again, this could be a whole very nuanced discussion, but from your expertise in this area, specifically heart health, as a pharmacist, as I said, someone who's into the fitness world as well, yourself from a personal level, the types of training you do, what would be your general kind of guidance for someone, who wants to improve their overall general health, wants to try and prevent things like diabetes, prevent things like, heart disease? What are some of the key things that you think people should be doing? Yeah, just give us a rundown.
So with diabetes prevention, the best friend that you're going to have is muscle mass. So if you can increase the amount of muscle mass that you've got, it's a bigger storage depot for glucose. And then the muscle can actually use glucose without the need for insulin. That is a wonderful thing about it, especially when you exercise with intent. So I would be increase muscle mass. Ways you can do that is, again, resistance train. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to a gym and lift ridiculous weights. It can be body weight. I mean, if someone tells me that doing press ups at home or pistol squats, pull ups are too easy, then I don't know, it's going to be a unicorn, because you can always make them infinitely harder. So definitely that. Diet wise, related to that, obviously, is protein intake, because we can't make certain amino acids, 9 of them. So it would be to increase your protein intake above the RDA, which was 0.8 grams per kilo. I would be aiming for 1.6 to 2 grams per kilo. And for context, I don't use any supplements. I don't use protein powders because of lactose intolerance. And I just thought a whole food approach, but I'm not going to go into that. You said it can be on a different thing, but definitely increase your protein intake. And then in terms of heart health and diabetic health, zone 2 training is probably the best thing that we can do. So zone 2 with VO2 max. So what does that look like for anyone? It's all about your baseline. So if you don't move around normally, just getting up and moving in terms of taking a walk, 10,000 steps a day was always a good marker. And that obviously that come from an advertising campaign in the Tokyo Olympics, I think it was, in the 60s, to sell one of them pedometers. But it would be, if someone is going to the gym, zone 2 training looks as though you can aerobically do a spin, jog, walk, but you can still hold a conversation. But ideally, you want the person next to you to be talking more than you can. Or you can breathe in and out through your nose, just about. And then probably for 20 minutes a week, do something called VO2 max training, which is 4 minutes of hard work followed by 4 minutes of recovery, and do that 3 to 4 times. They're the main things that I would do.
Yeah, I think the strength training one is interesting. I think muscle mass, as I worked, as you know, I worked in the fitness industry as well. And one thing I saw and I noticed was, as people got older, they started veering towards cardiovascular exercises more, right? And then I am very much generalizing, but I'm generalizing on what these eyes have seen, right? So this is not a generalization now. What I used to see was that older people would spend a lot of time on the cross trainer, on the bikes, on the treadmill, and the younger people would be the ones lifting the weights. Where actually, I think it's important for everyone to be in the weight room or lifting the weights or doing something. And as you said, you don't have to be lifting weights. I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's important. You can build strength in many different ways, body weight exercises. We used to use resistance bands in the diabetes program, where, we use those kind of, they use them in Pilates a lot, or you can buy them for relatively cheap on Amazon now, and just using resistance bands to kind of help build muscle. So even if you have injuries, or not, or even if don't have access, right? Access is a big issue as well in certain areas where you don't have access to facilities. One thing I like, I've seen in recent years, is you go to a lot of public parks now and you see pull-up bars and dip bars and these free community exercise bits of equipment in parks. So utilize that, of course, weather pertaining. So muscle is a really important one. And then zone 2, as you quite rightly said, it depends on where you are and what your baseline is. And I think this is important because a lot of people think that, oh, it means I have to start running. Well, no, it doesn't mean you have to start running. If you're not running now, then that's not what we're saying, right? Are you getting the 10,000 steps a day? Are you being active for a certain period of time? Are you getting your heart rate up above baseline? And as you said, not completely, out of breath, but you can still hold a conversation. So there's all these small things that we can do. And not only are these going to improve your physical health, as you've alluded to, but we know, and the science is conclusive on this, that physical activity reduces your stress levels as well, right? It brings down your overall stress level, and it's good for you from that perspective.
Yeah, I think there's a few things as well. So in terms of how people train, so you said younger people tend to do weight training mainly because it's aesthetically driven, and also because you need to be able to do everything. So you should be doing weight training, zone 2 training. You should also be doing mobility, which is something I need to work more on. But because you've got to do everything, you feel as though you're missing out on one aspect. So you can't perfect being a bodybuilder, you can't perfect being a long distance runner because you've got to encompass everything. And I think that's where it comes into how me and Jess have changed our perception on healthy living, is that we've set our targets at different ages now. So years ago, it might have been a holiday in 8 weeks' time. Let's go and do 100 sit-ups a day and okay, we'll look quite good for it. Or it might be a competition, a race, let's say. But when you look at blue zones, so you look at Okinawa, you look at Sicily, you look at all these Mediterranean places where people are living in the 90s to 100s, they're not necessarily doing anything of great stress in an exercise format. So they're not lifting 100 kilos above the head. They're not sprinting 100 meters. They're just doing baseline activity every single day, staying active, which is something that I fall victim of. Obviously, having a desk job for 7-8 hours a day, sleeping 7 to 8 hours a day if I can. And then if I'm not in the gym, I'm either sitting down doing work on a business. So for maybe 21 hours a day, I'm sedentary, which is coming out now is probably the biggest killer in comparison to smoking because you're just not moving.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that. I think sedentary behavior has become, it's the new smoking, right? Exactly as you said, and it's has extremely high risk factors. And I've become, COVID was the kind of turning point for me, and I think it was for a lot of people. Whereas before COVID, I was in a job where I was out and about on my feet, doing 15,000, 20,000 steps easily without even thinking about it. Right? It wasn't that I was trying to do those steps; I was just doing it. And then suddenly COVID hits, and I'm at home, and ever since then, I've been chained to this desk, right? And I've noticed it. I've noticed it in myself as well. So I think it's really important if those of you that are listening or watching this, if that's you, then what conscious effort are you making to move your body, to get out, and out. Something we didn't touch on is getting outdoors in the fresh air, right? Getting sunlight, being in nature. All of these things that we know are beneficial for your health. Tying it back to the kind of the theme of this podcast in terms of mental health and reducing stress levels. All of these things do work. I don't know anyone who's gone for a walk just to go for a walk's sake, who's come back and I asked them how was that walk and they've gone, it was totally rubbish, I wish I never went, right? Generally, if you go for a walk and you go in nature, it doesn't matter what it's like outside, you come back and you feel good. And I think that's important to remember that. And the blue zones is a good example of that. That's the compound effect, isn't it? These people have been doing these activities, whether it's cycling to the shops every day, carrying their shopping home, walking all these steps. They've been doing all these things for decades of their life. And add to that the diet, add to that the community, the what do you call it? Connection that they get from other human beings. That all compounds to why these people are living longer and healthier.
Yeah, and going back to being outdoors as well, I did read a study again, this is about 18 months ago, where if you look at most companies, so Apple, Microsoft, the screensavers are defaulted to nature And just even looking at a screen with trees, a sea, for example, I think it lowered your stress by 11%. I think it was subjective study, but still, it's just all them things where it just impacts your mentality to a different extent. And I think when you're injured as well, I'm very rarely injured, but there was a bit of time about 6 months ago where I had a bit of, I think it was back cramp for a day. And that one day I couldn't do any exercise. I just felt awful. So all these things do compound. And if you do have the ability to do it, it's hard to get out and move. It is. I mean, I was privileged today where I work from home. So from 12 to 1, I've got no patients in my clinic. I can go out and have a walk. And if I had to go out this afternoon, I mean, it was teeming down up in Liverpool. It would have been hard. And there's people who've got family or they're commuting home. So it is a conscious effort to make. But I think, like you said, I don't think anyone regrets any activity, whether it be indoor or out.
Yeah. I think that's important. And I like what you said there. You're absolutely right. Just looking at nature, having like plants in your home, even fake plants, right? They've done studies on that, having fake plants in your environment. I think I've got a few on the shelf behind me here.
Yeah, we've got to have fake plants. We can't look after real ones. We had one for 2 weeks and it's gone.
I'm the same, exactly why I have fake plants. But even having those, there's an interesting school of thought and studies done in the world of kind of mindfulness and meditation where they do visualization exercises, and the brain doesn't know what's actually real or what's imagined. So even just closing your eyes and imagining that you're in a beautiful spot of nature, whether it's somewhere you've been before or not, that's shown to reduce your stress levels, bring your cortisol levels down, and all of those different factors. So visualization, there are so many apps now, and free apps and free channels on YouTube, and even playlists on Spotify where you can listen to nature sounds, right? Water trickling or waterfalls or raindrops or all of this stuff. That is all extremely powerful to help just kind of calm the nervous system and bring a bit more calm to your life as well.
Yeah, it's funny that in a country where it rains so much that we feel calm from listening to rain to go to sleep.
Yeah,
any other time of the day we're not happy.
That's a very good point. Lee, it's been amazing speaking to you. Thank you for your insights and the work you're doing. I think it's really refreshing to see someone who's kind of trying to step out of the traditional healthcare model and look at things from a different lens, bring their own kind of personality and their flavor and just a new way of looking at our holistic health. If you want to find out more about what you're up to, what your lovely partner Jess is up to, where can they find you guys?
So we've got Bialyte on Instagram, or the actual website's bialyte.co.uk. Personal pages, I mean, I've got that many names because so many people call Lee Smith. So it's Lee Smith Fitness on Instagram, and I think it's Lee the Pharmacist on YouTube now. And I think Jess has changed their names quite a bit, but Jess at Bialyte, I think is Health with Jessica is her Instagram.
I will.
She's changed it a couple of times.
I'll get the right ones off you, and I'll make sure they're linked in the show notes around this episode. Bialyte is BYOLETE. Is that right? Bialyte.co.uk.
It is, yeah.
Perfect. Go check out Lee. Go check out Jess. Go check out Bialyte, and see what they're up to. But appreciate your time today, Lee. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us on, Sunjay.